everybody, how are you? Thank you for that fabulous introduction. Hello out there in the lovely sunlight. Who's a fan of the JWST or the Just Wonderful Space Telescope? Any fans out there? A few of you? Apparently, it might, and this is a definite might, it might have discovered some stars powered by dark matter. Oh my God, the next revolution in physics is coming. So look, here we are at Floriade. Floriade is what it says. And apparently I'm advertised to be on at this time, and blow me down, we are here exactly at the dot of 12:30. Big it up for us, aren't we wonderful? So, we are wonderful, true, and big up. Now, I'm going to talk about the truth, as we call it. So I thought I'd get you in the mood by showing you a few genuine newspaper headlines. And the first one deals with teen pregnancies. And to give you the introduction to that, let me point out that you stop being a teenager when you're 20. Yet this headline says that teen pregnancies drop off significantly after 25. They actually drop off at 20. Why does the sewer smell? The city's not sure. Gee, things got so bad the hospital had to hire doctors. What the heck? And then starvation could lead to health hazards, right? So these are genuine newspaper headlines. So we're here to talk about sustainability, and there's a big picture and the little picture. And the little picture depends on local stuff, which I'm not across. So I'm going to try and give the big picture, which then feeds down into the little picture. And the big picture is that the solution to climate change is ridiculously simple. It's just keep fossil carbon in the ground. It has the big problem that it would interfere with the profits of the fossil fuel companies. But that's the only thing stopping climate change from being reversed. So what do we use fossil fuels for? We use them 60% for energy. And by the way, if you've got a petrol tank with 100 units of energy in there, to get the energy there, you had to get some fossil fuel from underground, process it, transport it. You had to use 67 units of energy to get it into your tank. So when they talk about wastage in the system, that's typically the wastage. And we can find alternatives to that. 20% is being used for plastics, microplastics, and as a result of that, it is in the interest of the fossil fuel companies that they keep on selling fossil fuels and they don't do recycling. If they do recycling, that cuts into their profits, and as a result, we have microplastics in our brain, and the word plasticenta was invented in the year 2021, plasticenta being a portmanteau word of microplastics and human placenta. And so we found them in some female placentas. Now we find them in every female placenta that's ever generated in birth, in the placenta, in its testicles, in the sperm. We find them in the brain. So if you get 6 of those bottle caps that you find on the plastic bottles of water, 6 of those weigh 7 grams. And on average, that's what the average adult has as plastic in their brain. And then we also have found them in every drop of water that falls out of the sky, at the top of Mount Everest, in the bottom of the Marianas Trench. In a typical bottle of water, 1 litre, 100,000 microplastic particles. And it is not compulsory that we get plastic type materials from fossil fuels. We don't have to, there are alternatives. And then the next is 20% comes from is used in agriculture, and we can find alternatives to that. We do not need to keep taking fossil fuels out of the ground, but it would cut into the profits of the fossil fuel companies. So renewables can give us all the energy that we want. With regard to plastics, on one hand, I love the cling wrap that you find around food that you bring from the supermarket to home, because it reduces wastage by about 30 to 40%. But on the other hand, it's totally not recyclable because it's made of fossil fuels, but you can make just as good cling wrap from soybean waste, which is totally recyclable. So we have alternatives to all these different things that we're using. Now, just a show of hands from the audience, who is familiar with the phrase TLDR? Not phrase, the acronym. Who's familiar with that? A few of you. Okay, for the rest of you, this will revolutionise your life. TLDR stands for too long didn't read. So if somebody sends you a big email and this goes on for pages, you just type in TLDR, send it straight back. You will save hours out of your day in the so-called compulsory admin that chews up our lives. And THM stands for take home message. And the take home message is that we can stop and reverse climate change, global warming, call it what you will, and bring it back not just to the level it was before your children were born, but before you were born. And we can do it with today's technology. And here's the kicker: it will cost half the money that we give to the fossil fuel companies. Now you're thinking, you mean the money that the fossil fuel companies earn? No, on top of that, we give the fossil fuel companies, on average, about 7 cents out of every dollar. And you're thinking, prove it to me. Okay, hang on for the ride. So the fossil fuel companies have been involved with the lies for a long time. The very first lie, beginning in 1990, and as we go through the history, you'll see the significance of that date, was that there's no such thing as climate change. The second, and that's just a lie. So we have the New York Times here. The last 10 years are the hottest years ever on record. And on that graph going back over 2,000 years, you can see the temperature gradually going down because we're heading into another ice age, and then suddenly it just kicks up. That's over a 2,000-year window. Looking at it over a shorter window, from 1880, you can see the red line sort of going up, and the greeny line is where it would have been without fossil fuel carbon dioxide. How much are we pumping into the air at the moment? 37 billion tonnes every year. The trees can handle 6 billion. 37 overwhelms them. If we stop putting 37, the trees can help us get it back. And then the next one was that there is climate change, but it's just natural, it's not our fault. And the one after that, the next slide was, well, it's actually good for us, because what it means is you don't have to wear so many jumpers in winter. Forget the 50,000 people who died in Paris from the heat wave. And then the next one is that there is damage from climate change. We caused it, but the damage is only minor. No, it's not. And the last lie is a twofer. It's two lies in one. And the first one is, look, it's too late to fix climate change. We just have to keep on burning fossil fuels forever. And then that's tied in with the second part of the lie, which is that the renewables, they're a good idea, but they'll never be here. They'll never be any good for the next century, and that's a second lie. So these are the list of the 5 lies that the climate change, that the fossil fuel companies are putting out over and over. Now, I've written about this in my little book, Dr. Karl's little book of climate change science. It's cheap. It's about 10, 15 bucks. And then also read The New Climate Wars, that's more expensive, by Michael Mann. So let's run through it in 5 stages, beginning firstly with the cover-up of climate change and the cover-up of the carbon dioxide warming. And there are still politicians in our federal parliament who say that the carbon dioxide level has not increased significantly. That's like saying, I don't accept that 7 times 2 is 14 because I'm a member of the South Canberra Sewing Club. We accept the 6 times tables, but not the 7 times tables. It's that ridiculous. So if you go way back to the time of Captain Cook, you'll see over here that back in 1760, the carbon dioxide level was 280 parts per million, and then it started going up. And then when we started doing accurate measurements around the late 1950s, it was already 320 parts per million, and then it went up to about 420 parts per million, give or take, and it's still rising. Now, if you get those first and last numbers, 280 and 420, and then you subtract them, you end up with the number of 140, which by a coincidence is half of where we started in 1760. So we have increased the carbon dioxide level by 50%, even though there are federal politicians who deny that. Okay, go figure. So let's just do it following the graph. And now I'll ask you a question, a rhetorical question. You've heard of the insurance companies refusing to take insurance on houses in certain areas because they are prone to flooding, and they're just going to flood the next time it rains heavily. Question is this: when did the insurance companies start factoring in climate change into their insurance policies? And the answer was in 2011. It was 1973. The world's largest reinsurance company, Munich Re, in 1973 said, we've got several centuries of weather and climate records. We've got several centuries of payouts across the world. This is what we're seeing. We're going to charge more. And all the other insurance companies followed very quickly. And that was in 1973. And very shortly, just a few years later, the chief scientist of the biggest fossil fuel company in the world, Exxon, said there's general agreement that we're influencing the climate through carbon dioxide, and that was James Black in 1977. And Exxon and all the other fossil fuel companies thought, really? We're in business of involves these carbon dioxide things being generated. Let's find out what's happening. And so they formed a major group called their Science Group in 1980, and they did the world's best science. Now here's a surprise. The very best climate science was done by the fossil fuel companies from 1980, 79 to 1990. They employed the world's best climate scientists, and they even acted upon what they got. So in 1982, the fossil fuel companies had been working on it for 2.5 years, said, okay, this is what we've found so far. And this is now a photograph of that meeting done on camera film. And over on the left-hand side, you can see the invitation to the meeting, which is dated the November the 12th, 1982. And on the right-hand side, you can see a graph. And that graph has the carbon dioxide on the left-hand side, the decades rolling past on the bottom, carbon dioxide on the right, and they made some predictions for the year 2020 if we were doing BAU or business as usual and not changing anything. And their predictions were that if we did nothing and just kept on ramping it up, that the carbon dioxide level would be up to around 415 parts per million, very close, and the air temperature would be up to about 1 degree C extra. Now let me just stop and take a little diversion here, which will be important later. We are not warming up the planet. The planet is 12,000 kilometres across. We're not warming up the core of the Earth or stuff that's 2,000 kilometres down or 100 kilometres under the surface. What we are warming up is the top 1 kilometre of the ocean, 1 degree C, and the bottom 10 kilometres of the atmosphere, which, by the way, is where all the life is. All we're warming up is the biosphere, not the planet. Let's be exact about our words. So the other thing is that 93% of all the heat that has been generated has gone into the oceans, and if it had not, there'd be no humanity because the air temperature would be 70 degrees C. But let's just keep on going. So they made this prediction 38 years in advance in 1982. And so to their credit, they actually started doing something to minimise the carbon dioxide. They thought, wow, that could lead to very bad things. And so they did things such as the Natuna gas field, which was the largest gas field in the whole world in the South China Sea over there. And they decided to not develop it because while it was 30% methane, or natural gas as they call it, it was 70% carbon dioxide. And by itself would have been the largest single point emitter of carbon dioxide on the whole planet and would have been responsible for 1% of all human emissions all by itself. And so they decided to not develop it, and they were good corporate citizens. By the way, we're giving away a prize for the other good corporate citizen act that the fossil fuel companies did. Now, you might not know this, but the only reason that we have whales today is because of the fossil fuel companies, and we're giving away, is that right, Monica? Yeah, okay. We have approval to give away a prize of a BMW, a block of flats in Tasmania for the person who gives the right answer to how the fossil fuel company saves the whale. So they're not automatically bad corporate citizens. They have done good things in the past. So moving along, then the insurance companies knew about it. We're doing the timeline now in 1973. The insurance companies, nothing personal, strictly business, they accepted the science of climate change in 1973. Big fossil fuel accepted it in 1982 and acted upon it. But the scientists need a bigger burden of proof. It is really easy to predict the past. You can give me any bit of data and I can give you an equation that will exactly fit that data from the past. But the essence of science is being able to predict the future. And so beginning in 1980, the climate scientists started making predictions, and by the time we get to 1990, so many of them had come through as accurate that the climate scientists said, okay, we all agree it's real. It's real. The fossil fuel companies are on board, the insurance companies are on board, the scientists are on board, everybody agreed that global warming was real. And then over here, you can see we've got to have a little graph of it. So this is a circular graph, and in the middle we've got the year 1880, and we've got the months rolling around. And so December of one year rolls into January of the next year, and you can see the temperature gradually winding its way up. Blue, green, it oscillates around. There's air pollution more, there's less, there's a world war, another world war. It bounces around. The general trend is to slightly get warmer, but it's going pretty slowly. Oh, a bit of red up there, and then we'll just stop it in the year 1990. So in 1990, all of the scientists and the climate change companies, the climate scientists, the insurance industry, fossil fuel, all agreed it was the climate change was real. And then suddenly, halfway through 1990, the fossil fuel companies chucked a Yui. They had the option of either saying, we will turn ourselves from fossil fuel companies into energy companies. Might be a bit risky, some of us might go broke, or we'll do business as usual and we'll bribe the general public and the media to the tune of $1 billion a year and put out these lies for as long as we need to. And that was back in 1990. They stopped accepting the science, they started denying it, they formed lobby groups to make people around the world, governments at council, state and federal people burning fossil fuels. And during that time, from 1990 till now, they have consistently denied carbon dioxide is a problem, and half of the carbon dioxide that's been added to the atmosphere was added since 1990. So if you do the timings of it, in the first 2 centuries, we put in about a quarter of the carbon dioxide, and we had some hints from Eunice Foote in the USA in the mid-1850s and John Tyndall in the UK, but it wasn't locked in hard science. And then beginning in the 1960s, in the next third of a century, we put in another quarter, and we were getting a pretty solid idea. But then once we hit 1990, we knew for sure that there was a thing called global warming. It was real, it was caused by carbon dioxide. And during that time, the fossil fuel companies, knowing the truth of what they knew, they denied it. It's almost as bad as, say, James Hardie and asbestos influencing the politicians in Australia to keep asbestos still being used, even though it had been known for decades it was a danger. Now, just a show of hands, how many of you ever heard somebody saying, oh, we were doing this and then we ran into some asbestos and it cost us thousands of years? Yeah, a few of you, you're right. So the only reason for that is that James Hardie Company lied for decades about asbestos. Nothing personal. And so if you look at the graph here, 1990 is the halfway point, and before 1990, half the carbon dioxide was put in, and we weren't 100% rock solid sure. But after 1990, the other half was put in, and we were rock solid sure, and the fossil fuel companies knew what they were doing. And then if you look at the graph going by, we see if there's any sudden increase, and the years start rolling by, and we are into the red, and then suddenly it looks like it's really taking off and expanding sideways. Now we turn the graph sideways, and you can see that it's sort of gone like this, and then bango, out it goes. It really takes off by the time we get to 2020. So that's 1990, when the fossil fuel companies started denying. That's where we started, and that's where we are today. But if the fossil fuel companies had said in 1982, we are going to move towards being energy companies, we'd be back at what it was in 1980. We wouldn't have had the 3 years of floods that happened on the east coast of Australia. There we are, 1990, 2025, 1980. A world of difference, 2025. So we've gone through the first part, which is the history of climate change and the cover-up. The next thing is the heat. Until I did my reading on this, and I did my very first story on climate change before many of you were born. I did that in 1981 on Double J, or Triple J, my first story on climate change. I wrongly thought that the heat came from the actual burning of the fossil fuels. No, it doesn't come from that. It is trapped sunlight. Now, when the sunlight is directly above you, which is not right now, but when it's directly above you on each square metre of land, there's 1 kilowatt of power. About half of that is heat, 500 watts. A bit less than half is visible light, and about 1% gives you cancer. That's ultraviolet. So it's that heat from the sun that's being trapped. So you have the sun up in the sky, and it's giving us heat, but it is not captured by the atmosphere on the way down, and there's some physics involved in here. Trust me, I can go through it later, but because it's coming down from the surface of the sun, which is at a temperature of 5,500 degrees, that heat does not kiss or interact with the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It ignores them. It goes straight to the ground, and it heats up the ground to 15 degrees C, which then radiates the heat upward, and if you look at the left-hand side, it then at that temperature interacts with the greenhouse gases. By the way, the greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, water and methane. It interacts with the greenhouse gases, and if all of the heat was absorbed by, say, the carbon dioxide and the water and the methane and then kept on going into space, there'd be no global warming. But half of it goes into space and the other half comes down to the ground. And so you've got the situation where the carbon dioxide is acting like a one-way valve. And the amount of heat that it traps each day is 600,000 Hiroshima bombs worth of heat, which you can get away with for a day or a week or a month or a year or a decade, but not several decades, and we're seeing the problems here now today. The third point is, why do we burn fossil fuels? And the answer is that they are loaded, simply loaded with concentrated energy. They have military industrial amounts of energy. Consider some bricks, and we've got some bricks and they're over here and they've got a certain weight, and we want to shift them up to there. We have to shift them through a certain height. The equations are very simple. We need a certain amount of energy. You can get an exact number. So let's consider firstly a labourer whom you're paying 50,000 a year to shift the bricks up that level, or you're going to use fossil fuel. Now, fossil fuel, a barrel of oil is 159 litres, about $100. Sometimes it goes negative. And it's roughly the same, a barrel of oil, as around 200 kilograms of high-grade coal. The amount of energy in a barrel of oil is equal to the energy put out by a labourer, not over a day or a week or a month, but 10 years. Oh my God, the economics are just so much in your favour. Instead of paying $500,000, you're paying only $100, but even better, all of that energy is concentrated in one place. Imagine that you're a fishing village, you live there, and all you got is sail. And you want to go out and get fish, but the wind is against you, the tide is against you, the storm's against you, you're not getting any fish, you're going hungry. But if you've got a little steam engine, you can just go putt, putt, putt out, and you can catch all the fish. And then when you want to drag 1,000 tons of fish onto your boat, or say 100 tons, you need 1,000 people. Each person could pull 1/10 of a ton, 100 kilograms. You can't fit 1,000 people onto the deck of a small fishing boat, but you can easily fit a steam engine. So it has the advantage of being really cheap and really concentrated, which is why we went for fossil fuels. They were a bargain. The next thing is, what are the effects of climate change? And they're multitudinous. So back in 2019, 2020, 1/5 of all the trees on the east coast of Australia caught on fire, and we had fires in areas that had not seen fire for 30,000 years, because we could dig down into the ground and see that there'd been no fire. And then also, and this is a bit hard to understand, but it makes sense, that set off the triple La Niñas of 2020, 21, 22. And you're thinking, how does that happen? Go to Wikipedia and look up pyrocumulonimbus, and these are strange storms that are set off by intense fire, where you get this cloud being generated that at ground level was able to set off a wind that blew over 25-ton fire trucks. Just blew them over, and went not just to the height of Mount Everest, but double that into the stratosphere, and then went around the world. And there's 3 days that made the difference. You can see it in the satellite photos. They are the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th of January in the year 2020. And on the 4th of January, you're seeing New South Wales at the top. Just look at the top picture first. That's just looking at fires, and that's New South Wales and Victoria. But the bottom one, and this is the 4th of January, is looking at the temperature of the top of the clouds. And these are the clouds in the stratosphere, and these are these really unusual pyrocumulonimbus clouds. Pyrocumulonimbus, look it up in Wikipedia. That was on the 4th of January. Now let's kick forward into the 5th of January, and this is a satellite photo looking down on the Pacific Ocean. And what you're seeing up at the top right-hand corner is a little bit of the USA, bottom right-hand corner, a bit of the South America, and over on the left-hand corner, you can see the hint of Australia and a brown cloud stretching across to New Zealand, and that's on the 5th of January. By the time we get to the 6th of January, it's gone halfway around the world, and what we're looking at now where that red line is the coast of South America. Now notice this, to the right-hand side, the cloud is still white. To the left-hand side, it's brown. So that's stopping the light from getting through. And that's spread around the whole southern hemisphere. So the next day it was brown everywhere. All the clouds were brown. And then we looked at it for a few years. And on the 23rd of May in the year 2023, in Nature magazine, Science Census came this report, a multi-year, so we're talking something happening over several years, we're talking about the La Niñas, a multi-year tropical, so we're talking near the equator, Pacific cooling response. Now, remember how earlier I said that the whole Earth hasn't warmed up, just the top kilometre of the ocean? What we're looking at here is a cooling, not of the top kilometre of the ocean, but the top 50 metres. And only off South America, and that sets off the El Niño, La Niña cycle. So, response to recent Australian wildfires. Yes, those bushfires set off those 3 La Niñas in a row. In this map here, you're looking at the entire world, and you can see Australia near the middle left, and then on the right-hand side you can see North and South America, and then you can see a red circle, a red square, and the red square, that is colder water, and that's part of the La Niña thing. We won't even go into that now, we can do it later. And then on the other side of the Pacific, of Australia, we've got warmer water. Now what happens when you've got warmer water on the stove? Boiling, getting warm, not boiling, you see this little tiny set of water droplets in the air. So the warmer water off the coast of Australia for 3 years set off the triple La Niña, rare triple La Niña, and we had the massive floods and the deaths. Triple La Niñas. So that's the way that the bushfires set off the 3 La Niñas, set off by the fossil fuel companies, which deny that climate change is happening still today. Sydney became the hottest place on Earth for a few hours one day, which is an amazing thing. And then we also, and these next 2 things are weird. We humans are very small. The Earth is very big. By melting ice at high altitude on land and turning it into liquid water and letting it run down the ocean, we unbalanced things a little bit. Think about balancing a bicycle wheel. You've got to shift the weights carefully. First, we tip the Earth slightly, ever so slightly, off its axis, and we can measure it. It has no measurable day-to-day effect, but it's just proof that we humans can affect something big like the Earth. And secondly, we started changing the Earth's spin, so we've moved from the days getting longer to getting shorter, and look it up with the leap second, all that sort of stuff. Totally caused by fossil fuels giving carbon dioxide and melting ice. Okay, the big thing, how do we fix it? And the good news is we can fix it, although it will cause a slight loss of profits for the fossil fuel companies, but the rest of us will be fine. And the answer is cubic money. And I don't know how many of you have done economics, but there's an organisation called the International Monetary Fund who are very hard-nosed, and they've issued a series of reports over the years, and this one was the first one in 2013 from the International Monetary Fund, and it's entitled Executive Energy Subsidy Reform. Energy is energy, Reform means change. For those of you who haven't studied economics, let me tell you the difference between a subsidy and an investment. With an investment, you come to me and you say, hey Karl, I know you've got a spare $100. Lend me $100. In a year's time, I'll give you 5% interest, I'll give you 105. And I say, okay, go for it. And so you make 45, you make $150 altogether, you keep 45, I keep 5 on top of what I had, you're happy, I'm happy. That's an investment, there's a repayment. Subsidy is we say, look Karl, we're having a big party, we just need an absolute shirtload of goon, give me $100, I give you $100, you buy a lot of goon, you have a really good time. That is a subsidy. I don't get anything back except the joy of knowing that you've had a good time in my soul. So the fossil fuel companies, let me emphasise this, are getting subsidies on top of the massive amounts of money they earn. So in 2013, covering the previous 6 years, they issued a report, the International Monetary Fund, saying that the subsidies were at 4%. So 4 cents out of every dollar went to the fossil fuel companies as a direct and indirect subsidy. I'm sure many people are not happy with that. Then in 2019, they issued another report looking at the previous 6 years, and they found that the subsidies had gone up to 5%. And you're thinking, yeah, but look, be reasonable. You got to have subsidies. It's a give and take. It's not as though you say, look, Jacinta, we love you to pieces. From the moment you were born 8 years ago to now, you've slept through the night, what's not to like? You're a glorious little sister to the other people in the family. You're a delight. You even empty the compost for us. We love you for that. We know you'll go and earn money and pay taxes, but so far you have generated nothing for the family, and we have been subsidising you for 8 years, and it's about time you went and worked in a coal mine. We don't do that. We subsidise her all the way through into high school and beyond, so that in the big picture, she then earns more money and puts more money back into Australia than we subsidise her for. So subsidies can be good. And the International Monetary Fund said, are the subsidies that we've been giving over the last 12 years to the fossil fuel companies, are those subsidies good for the economy? And the answer was, hell no. Those subsidies, the free money, the 5 cents out of every dollar that's earned by you, actually depressed the economy, was bad for the environment, bad for people's health. It was a bad thing. And then looking at the latest updates, the latest is that the subsidies are now up to 7%. So if your kids work at McDonald's, 7 cents out of every dollar they earn is given to the fossil fuel companies as a present on top of the massive profits that they make. And Australia subsidises them as well. And you're thinking, what sort of side effects are there? Well, each year about 80 million people in the world die for various reasons. 10% of them die because of breathing air polluted by fossil fuel emissions, and not one fossil fuel company sends them a cheque or money or a bank deposit to cover the loss of income, the cost of medical care, etc. It's caused directly by the air pollution from fossil fuels, and they don't pay any compensation for it whatsoever. And in Australia, the deaths from air pollution are 11,000 a year, and our air is terrific. And you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of money. That's roughly 7% of the world GDP, which is not a good measure of economy anyway. It's about 3 times the world military budget, and it's about 5 times Australia's GDP, and we're going to come back to Australia's GDP in a little while. It's about $1.5 trillion, or if you like, $1,500 billion, same thing. And it's also equal to 70 times what we spend on space. And you're thinking, but surely it's only fossil fuel. There are no other companies that do bad things. Well, I spent some time as a medical doctor working in a respiratory ward, and let me tell you, death from respiratory failure is not a good death. You know how you feel when you've been running really hard and you're sort of going like that? If you are dying from respiratory failure, every breath you take is that hard until you die. It is not a good death. And in Australia, we have the situation where 20,000 people die of various diseases caused by tobacco. On the other hand, there is an economic benefit because there are taxes from tobacco. Let me just correct myself. The tobacco companies do have the option of paying tax, but they have chosen not to exercise that option by having companies set up in areas like the Cayman Islands and other tax havens. However, the people who shift tobacco around in Australia, they generate income and therefore taxes of around $10 billion a year. But the cost to the economy is somewhere between $30 and $130 billion in terms of lost income, hospital care, death, funerals. Funerals aren't cheap if you've ever had one. And so that means we pick the lesser number of 30 billion. We are in a situation where we Australians, we pay $20 billion a year to kill 20,000 Australians. How does that make any sense whatsoever? But it's evolved over time. And you're thinking, okay, big tobacco's bad, but alcohol's okay. No. In every single hospital in Australia in August 2018, this poster appeared and it has 3 paragraphs. And very shortly, 1 week later, it was a huge poster, A0. And very shortly, it was replaced by a poster, you can't see it very well, with 2 paragraphs. And by the way, notice there, the woman is pregnant and has no head. Boo the patriarchy. I had to get out of my system, thank you very much. Moving along. So, that paragraph says, it is not known if alcohol is safe to drink while you are pregnant. We're not talking about a little tipple of, oh, you did well in your exams, let's have a little glass of champagne. We're talking about serious drinking. It is not known. That is a lie. We have known that that is a lie for half a century. And yet that poster appeared in every hospital, public and private, in Australia in August 2018. Now, it was totally wrong. Now, why they do it, we've got a little video coming up, so get ready for the sound. Why do they do it? Well, it's coming from where I get all of my moral values. I get all of my moral values and I run my life by the good book. I'm talking here about The Godfather. And here is why the alcohol companies did it. Here it comes.
It's not personal. It's strictly business.
And we'll do it again with a bit more volume.
It's not personal. It's strictly business.
Nothing personal, it's strictly business. They weren't deliberately trying to generate a whole cohort of babies born with fetal alcohol syndrome, mentally and physically retarded. No, that was only a byproduct, accidental. Their real goal was that there were these people called pregnant women and they were trying to tell them that it was okay to binge. Nothing personal, it's just business. Okay, so that's them. So the fossil fuel subsidies, 7% of the world GDP, both direct and indirect, we only need half of that money that we're giving to them to fix up carbon dioxide climate change. We just take their subsidies away and we spend the money on other things such as, I don't know, unicorn parties, forgive me, education. The only reason that I'm here on stage is that I've had 16 years of university education given to me for free by you, the taxpayer, because once upon a time, the Australian government thought that education was a worthwhile investment in the future. But now we've got the strange situation that people who wish to study a trade, and remember, without plumbing there is no civilization, the people who wish to study after high school are subsidising the fossil fuel companies. And you're thinking, that's kind of wrong, we'll go into it. So if you want to know more about how to fix it, the international point of view comes from drawdown.org. Look them up on the web. You can download this document and it basically breaks it into 3 major parts, which is to reduce the sources. And remember, the trees can handle 6 billion tonnes a year, not 37. And increase the sinks, the trees, and other industrial sinks as well, and that'll give a better life. And then the Australian version is Zero Carbon Australia, bze.org.au, Beyond Zero Emissions Australia. And they've come up with something called the Million Jobs Plan, and there are so many jobs in renewables, and you're saying, wow, that's good, you know, jobs in renewables, that's good, but surely the fossil fuel companies employ hundreds of millions of people. Between them, they employ, the mining and fossil fuel companies, fewer people than McDonald's does. And then he's saying, well, at least they pay tax. Well, let's get into that right now. Now, this next slide is a bit hard to see because it's a direct snapshot of the Australian Tax Office 2021 Corporate Tax Transparency Report. And there's all these companies, and these are the top companies by revenue in Australia. And by an amazing coincidence, it's because they take this stuff out of the ground virtually for free and then do stuff with it. They don't manufacture a single thing. They just take it out of the ground, solid, liquid and gas. And the top ones there, fossil fuel companies there, and they've got in revenue 20 billion, 17 billion, 14 billion, and when you add it all up, it comes to 150 billion, which is 1/10 of Australia's entire GDP. And you think, well, at least they pay tax on it. And the answer is they do. In this particular year, they do pay tax. Big it up for them. And you're thinking, I pay tax. On average, you and I pay 27% tax, but let's give the fossil fuel companies a bit of a break and make them pay, say, only 20% tax. And if they were paying 20% tax, 1/5, on 150 billion, it'd be 30 billion. They're not paying 20% tax, or 0.02, which is 30 million, or 0.00002, which is 30,000. No, the amount of tax that the fossil fuel companies paid in 2021 on $150 billion was 30. Not 30 billion, 30, full stop, $30, which I have worked out will, for the entire Australian population of 25 million people over a calendar year of 364 days, provide all of us the ability to share in 6 cups of coffee. There's no roads in there, there's no schools. There's 6 cups of coffee to be shared out among all Australians over a full calendar year, which works out to 0.0004 mils, which you cannot see with a microscope. So the fossil fuel companies lied since 1990, knowing the truth. Just like James Hardie lied, like Big Alcohol lied, like Big Tobacco lied. And you can see the difference of where we are today because they lied. But if they had not lied, we wouldn't have had those massive floods and deaths on the east coast of Australia, and we would be in a better position. But they're still lying, so it's time to go on a war footing, not in the sense that we actually kill people, but we shift our industry into another pathway. And this requires executive action by politicians. P for power, P for politicians. And the good example here is the 7th of December 1941 when Pearl Harbor got bombed, and almost immediately all the companies stopped making consumer products and shifted over onto war footing, making artillery and tanks and aeroplanes, big aeroplanes like this one that were huge, weighing 30 tons and could fly at very high speed because they had big engines carrying a big heavy load. They had a range of 2,500 kilometres here to Perth. And they built a special factory. Did anybody see the movie Ford versus Ferrari, show of hands? At one stage, he says, see that factory down there? And he's talking about this factory. Now that factory, which they built in a hurry, turned out to be the largest single-story building in the entire planet. And it was pumping out these aeroplanes. Now these aeroplanes were very different from cars. Firstly, they had 500,000 parts instead of 5,000. Secondly, they were high-tech parts rather than low-tech parts. And thirdly, they needed skilled labour rather than unskilled labour. Things got so bad, and I know this is going to shock you, things got so bad, they even paid women as much as men for doing the same work. That's how bad things were. And then it got even worse. All the governments talk about how much they love children. They even set up government-funded childcare. That's how bad things got. Of course, they realised the mistake after the war and they reversed it. And they were pumping out these huge aeroplanes at the rate of not one a fortnight, one every hour. The Second World War was won as much by the machine gun as by the machine shop. So with a zero carbon world, it's very simple. We just keep fossil carbon in the ground. We take no more carbon at all from underground. and we just get it, we just leave it there. We just leave it there. We don't need it for anything. So there has to be a fair transition. So you can't just simply say, we're just going to fire everybody who's working in fossil fuels, go onto the street, see you later, we don't care about you. There's got to be a fair transition. And so part of the transition is moving into solar, and for some unknown reason, solar has really taken off massively. So it took, this is the article in the New Yorker by Bill McGibbon, and it says the sun is having a moment. So in the first 58 years since solar panels were invented, or 68, it took us that time to get 1 terawatt of generating capacity. So a watt is how you measure power, which is energy per second. And so a light bulb might be 5-10 watts, a car engine a couple of 100,000 watts, a generating station millions or megawatts. So we're talking gigawatts, that's billions, and terawatts is trillions. It took us 60-something years to get to that. And then to get to the second terawatt took us 2 years. And to get to the third terawatt, we're going to get there later this year. How come we can do it so rapidly? And the answer is that the production has scaled up so fast that we are installing 1 gigawatt of solar panels every 15 minutes. Now let me put that in context. If every single way of generating electricity in Australia was switched on at the same moment and run flat out, we could generate 100 gigawatts, which means that in 25 hours, we could install Australia's entire generating capacity in solar. We'll talk about the storage in just a little while. So the solar is just taking off like crazy. We also need climate resilient infrastructure. We won't go into that right now. New manufacturing materials are just coming down the line so fast. So with regard to, we've got electric car paint, where the paint is a solar paint bonded to the car metal. It's very thin, it's got no toxic materials in it. And here you can see that it lets, even though you might have red or green or blue paint on it, it lets through 94% of the sun's energy to act and generate electricity. And it will give your car, if you park in somewhere like where there's not much cloud cover, Sydney, Perth, Los Angeles, for free, just parking out in the sun will give you 25 kilometres a day. Just park your car out in the sunlight, you get 25 kilometres a day. So this is part of the new materials that we need. Also, we've now got lithium batteries. They're only laboratory prototypes. Firstly, these lithium batteries can be recharged in 5 minutes, not 20. Secondly, they've got 5 times the capacity. So instead of going 500 kilometres, you can go 2,500. These are coming, they're only laboratory prototypes, they're not commercial yet. Then we can have to do other stuff, looking at the big picture, the fair transition, agriculture. This involves policy and government, and that's what we are here in Canberra. But also take the example of Africa, which has 20% of the world's population, but generates only 4% of the carbon dioxide, and yet they are suffering more than any other country. Over 500,000 people have no, 500 million people have no electricity, and you end up with more than 500 million people dying from air pollution, from burning fossil fuels. They put out the least, they suffer the most. We have to have a fair transition. That's an essential part of it. And electric cars are seen as a problem, but they're actually the solution. Let me take you through this. This is part of the clever lies that you keep on getting on Sky TV and so forth, and in the Murdoch press. They say that there's not enough charging stations now. They're correct. Who is old enough to remember that once upon a time at school you had a thing called a computer room? Right, everybody's got a computer in their pocket. It's like saying, oh, we have to have a pencil room where you go and, if you've got a clever thought, write it down. So we're heading that way. They're saying that there's not enough lithium if we were to throw it away after 8 years. Firstly, that's a lie. There is enough lithium. But secondly, you don't want to throw it away because we know why. Recycled lithium has better electrical performance than brand new lithium. You're better off recycling it than not. And then there's 4 stages we're going to go through. And some cars have got all 4, some don't, most don't. And the first stage is V2V. Now that's vehicle to vehicle, and you might remember in the old days, You'd be driving on the road, somebody would run out of fuel, get a hose, you'd siphon some petrol into their tank, vehicle to vehicle. You can do the same thing on some cars, just with a cable. You give them a bit of juice. V2V. The next stage is vehicle to load, which means you've got an inverter and you make 240 volts out of a standard, coming out of a standard plug, and you plug in your fridge or your microwave or whatever you want to take with you when you're traveling. That's V2L. The next stage is V2H, vehicle to house, but only one circuit, only one circuit. And you're thinking, what's the use of that? Well, with the big La Niñas that we had that were caused by fossil fuel companies, because they caused the Earth to tip off its axis. They caused the Earth to change its spin. They set off the triple La Niñas because they lied about what they were doing and deliberately bribed their way through it. You can run your house, and during the La Niñas, people up and down the east coast of Australia were running a circuit of their house, one single power circuit, just by plugging it in. And it worked. They could get like a couple of weeks running their house on the car. And that's a big surprise. And V2G is where it's fully integrated. So wherever you park your car, that's a charging station. And you plug in, you plug out. You don't have to charge it into your house because all the electrons are the same. All you need to know is how much electricity you absorb from the grid during the day when there's an excess, and how much you give back to the grid at night when there's not an excess, the other way around. And so with regard to electric batteries, they are typically in a big car, they've got about 100 kilowatt hours, and you're thinking, what does that mean in terms of running a house? Well, it'll run a car 500 kilometres, but it'll run the average American house for 3 or 4 days. That's everything. They're really inefficient. It'll run our energy efficient house has a floating population of 2 to 8 people for about 10 or 12 days. So it'll run everything in the house for 10 or 12 days. Everything. The fridge, the stove, the dishwashers, everything. Or it'll run an apartment for 20 to 25 days. So the cost, if you want to buy it, ranges from a lot to zero to buy a 100 kilowatt hour battery. If you go and buy some Tesla batteries, which have got good software, but their after sales service is not that good, you're looking in US figures at $73,000, which is a lot to run your house for a week or so. But you can buy the most popular car sold in America, which is the Ford F-150, but buy the Lightning version, which is electric battery, and you can plug it into your house and run a circuit, not the whole house. It's V2H, not V2G. You run a circuit, and that costs you half of what it does to buy Tesla batteries, and you get a car thrown in for free. Or you can go to Tesla Spare Parts and buy a Tesla battery for $18,000 and they're still making a profit. Or you can use the battery in your car and it costs you nothing. So being able to run your house, the extra infrastructure you have to put in is microscopic, because most of the cost is in the fact that you've already got an electric car with an electric battery. And so it costs you nothing. So these are actually the solution to where we're going. They'll store the excess electricity and give it back. All the electrons are the same, it doesn't matter. And if the whole of Australia's electrical generating capacity were to fall over, and each of the 20 million vehicles in Australia was an electric car, we could run Australia entirely off the car batteries for a week. You'd have to walk everywhere, but apart from that, it'd be okay. So with a zero carbon world, we can get there really quickly for electricity in 10 years. For steel and concrete, we can do that in 10 years. Already, Swedish companies are making steel without burning any carbon and putting that steel into Volvo trucks, which are electric powered, and the electricity comes from renewables, and they do mining. So it's totally renewable with regard to actually extracting the minerals from the earth. Transport, we need another 5 years for aeroplanes and ships, which between them make up about 5% of global emissions. We're talking hydrogen, we can talk about that a little bit later. For livestock, 5 to 20 years. There's nothing stopping us except policy and the fact that if we keep fossil carbon in the ground, the fossil fuel companies will reduce their profits. And that really bothers them. They don't want to have that happen to them. So, in summary, we don't have to adjust to an inevitable future. We can then just use the money that we're giving to the fossil fuel companies and use it to change the world for a better place and end up stopping and reversing climate change with today's technologies. That was a pretty heavy message, so I'll stop right there and we'll throw over the questions. Thank you very much. Thank you.